Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 12 of the Data Governance Podcast. And this is our final episode in this season. And to finish off, I think we're going to do it in great style because I am interviewing the amazing Heather Wade. I've known her for a number of years, and she approached me earlier in the year asking whether she could interview me for her research for her PhD thesis. And I had an amazing time having that conversation with her. And I wanted to turn the tables and have her back on the podcast because I think you're going to find the topic of her thesis incredibly interesting. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So welcome, Heather.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicola. Really, really delighted to be here and to be talking about my research. And I was very, very, very happy to have you as one of my research participants in that.
Brilliant. Excellent. So, I suppose I should ask you, what was the title or is the title of your dissertation?
So it's, I love the title. My supervisor and I worked on this a bit. We went back and forward. So it is now officially, because I'm going to hand it in the next couple of days. So this is really hot off the press. It is officially called Shedding Light on the Dark Side of Data When Risks Outweigh Benefits. So fundamentally, and we'll dive into this a lot more, my entire premise was around, there is so much conversation about data these days. There's so much conversation about the hype, the benefits, the value. And I felt there was less conversation around the risk that really sits on the other side of that. And I really wanted to get under the skin of that and to look at that in a lot more detail.
Excellent. Is that how you came up with this title?
Yeah. My supervisor being Italian, I mean, I'm studying at an Italian university, although you can tell from my accent that I am not at all Italian. He had this slightly more dramatic kind of feel and really wanted to think about this, the dark side of data. And, he has actually been researching in the topic of data, but more around marketing for years. And he put this really nice spin on it. We went through some iterations, sort of started off with a bit more of a value and a kind of more like, I suppose slightly, I was going to say upbeat title. That's not quite fair because I actually think the title as it is now is fantastic and will draw people in. But it was a little sunnier to begin with. And then we thought, no. What's really coming out of this research is around how much risk there is and how much we are dependent on having the right strategies and governance and sort of risk assessments in place. And that actually that's a conversation that just doesn't get as much airplay as the value and the benefits and the hype.
Yeah, so I love the title. I can't wait to actually read it when it comes out. But I suppose the big question is, you're a busy lady. Why did you decide to do this dissertation in the first place?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give you the honest answer. It was the big second lockdown during COVID, and I was really looking for something interesting to do that was beyond kind of baking more lemon cake and things like that. And so I started looking for interesting courses, and I wanted to do an independent piece of work, and I wanted it to be in data, and I wanted to look at something that was just not nearly as prevalent. I mean, I started off with ideas around looking at marketing. I was actually working more in the marketing space at that point. And I just quickly realized that, no, I just want to dive into the other side of this. So I really looked around at some interesting places offering these kind of courses. I came across Milan and I thought, you know what, when we come out of lockdown, it's going to be really good fun to travel there. And they actually had a number of very, very interesting professors who were studying within that area. And I thought, you know what, I would really like to work with these people. So it was something that really hit my sweet spot in terms of the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, and also hit the sweet spot for research, which is, you need to find that nugget of something interesting that hasn't been researched to death. That's the whole point of academia. Find the little interesting bit, that interesting area that you can work in, and then go and add to that. And I really felt that I could make an impact in that space.
Excellent. So I suppose we ought to talk about your research then, really. The obvious thing since we've covered everything else. Yeah. And I suppose it's, given that, you've got this amazing title and having been on the receiving end of an interview, I know you asked lots of really, in-depth questions. What did you actually find in the course of your research then?
Yeah, so It was absolutely brilliant. So the way that I did it was a lot of qualitative research, which basically means I went and talked to a whole lot of people who were very, very senior in the data space. And I really made sure I was talking to people on what I would call both sides of the equation. So people who really focus on like the benefits and building, and people who are more focused on the kind of the governance, the risk, that side as well. And it was fascinating. So I drew up my question set, and the first question really was always around, okay, very, very openly, talk to me about how data is managed within either your clients or your company. Do you know what's there? Just the simple stuff, or what you think will be the simple stuff. The answer to that question was so fascinating that it just set the direction actually for the way that the thesis turned out. A question that I thought would be like, yes, we kind of got this. We're in a really good place. All right, we're not quite there, but we know what we're doing, was generally not the case. It was generally the case that people would say some kind of element of everything from, oh my gosh, no, we really don't have that, through to a more gentle, yeah, we're going there, but we don't really have that. And so this really helped me to kind of shape what came next. So I think the major thing that came out was that there is still so much kind of tension within the world of data. So there is that tension between, I don't know where everything is, but I am the data leader who is meant to govern, to look after, to use, to do all this. I don't have the right investment in my team to do all the things that I would really want to do, but I'm being pushed for more and more and more models. I'm not seeing the quality or the spend on quality. And this isn't about buying a tool, just even the process and the people and the focus around the areas that are really going to drive the future. And what was actually happening, and what the other thing that I was hearing, was this hype and this push from the top, from really senior leadership around things like generative AI, and we need to be ahead and we need to be building. But the capability, not the capability, the capacity to do that based on some of the data that exists in the business was not there. And the reason that this then came around to really a conversation more around things like risk was that, well, this is a huge risk. You're being asked to do, as a data leader, to do many, many things by your senior team in order that you can then, show ROI, build your team, get more, do more. And fundamentally, what I found mostly was that people were doing this on foundations that they felt were just that little bit shaky sometimes.
Which is scary stuff, really, isn't it?
It's scary stuff. I mean, when you're researching, in a way, it's fantastic to find something like that, because you're like, wow, this is not what I was expecting, and this is something interesting I can write about. But as somebody who also works in the data space, it is quite scary, and it's not a conversation that we're having enough.
So no, this is true. So given the title and your focus on risk, I'm going to have to ask you, why did you actually ask to interview me, being that I'm not known for being an expert in data risks?
So yeah, it's you were very, very, very much at the top of my list of people that I wanted to talk to. And I actually think, I mean, you say data risk, but actually so much of this risk can be alleviated if you are looking at the right levels of governance within your business. Okay. And as I was interviewing, this just became so apparent to me. That is one of the beauties of qualitative research. You are learning as you're going, and you're really being able to then tweak some of the things that you ask. By the time I interviewed you, I was about halfway through my interviews, and it really, at that point, was becoming so apparent that so much of this was about having better governance and better quality and how that fitted together. The actual other interesting thing was that there was no clear definition of how some of these things then fitted together. So it's like, okay, we have data strategy and data governance and data risk. And is risk part of governance? Is governance part of strategy? Is strategy part, whatever. And there's some really nice tensions around that as well. I know which way, because I asked you that question, I know which way you answered, and I can tell you that other people answered in exactly the opposite view, which is
I can
fascinating.
imagine. Yeah.
But I firmly believe that risk should be governed. I believe that this should be part of what you do as a data leader. This should be part of the principles by which you operate. And we need to think about what is the structure to bring that in. is there a framework or a better framework by which you can be looking at the risks that you've got and actually put those into the governance that you do in your business?
Absolutely. So I think, I mean, obviously, we don't have long to talk about these things, and I'm sure your dissertation is a lengthy document. So I just want to try and perhaps tease out some of the highlights of it. But the one thing that always intrigues me is when people, and you've already said it, when you find surprising things. So what was
Yeah.
the most surprising thing that you discovered whilst doing your research?
The most surprising thing was actually you're working in this world of data and you think it's quite binary and quite logical and zeros and ones, right? And you think it's quite a logical thing. And actually the emotion that a lot of people expressed around a lot of these topics was absolutely fascinating. There is a lot of and clearly I'm not going to call anyone out in particular, but I talked to a lot of data leaders, and there is fear, right? There is fear around, oh my gosh, I'm not seeing what I would want to in order to do the things I need to do. My senior leaders team are talking about fear of missing out, not being ahead of the game, not having the right things in place, and I need to battle against that. There is a real emotion in the sense of wanting to build and protect your team and not always being able to do that on this kind of short term, I must show the ROI. So I think that was super interesting. And then I think there was a third part of that, which was the data function is still relatively new. If you think about other corporate functions like a finance function, HR, even marketing and commercial, they are much more established. It's quite clear what they're doing. I know there are nuances, but it is quite clear what they're doing. But data's not that, right? There are still many, many, many different models. There's not even clarity on, is a chief data officer a board role into a CIO, a CTO, a commercial function? What? So with all of that going on, it's actually, it's very hard to even keep at pace with what you need to be doing, let alone really doing the, not always the most exciting things of like risk and all the governance and piece around that. You want to be going off and building a shiny model. And people talked about that. I want to do the shiny, but I can't because I haven't got this in place. So that the emotion, the tension, and the lack of clarity of what this data office really, really is and what it should be for the future was just so interesting to talk about.
I'm sure, and it must be, because I think it's not something that you can go on public platforms like LinkedIn, or those same data leaders couldn't come and voice those things on like my podcast, because they have to be seen to be leading people, inspiring people, and doing this. And so, yeah, I can imagine that being really surprising that these people that publicly come across as very confident are actually saying this is really hard, it's scary stuff.
Yeah,
So,
that was absolutely it. And I think it was actually a real privilege to have people say this and to sort of trust me with that and to really express some of this. And I do think that these are conversations that we should be having more. You're right. We don't all have to go out on LinkedIn and put, yep, pretty fearful today. It's not that, but it's within the industry. Let's really think about how we can discuss some of this.
yeah, absolutely. Because I think it is only by supporting each other and trying to find that clarity, trying to work out what is it that we're all supposed to be doing, as you said. I think that's great. Now, I think one of the things I really love about you, Heather, is that you're not doing this just for academic sake. It's the you work in this as well. This is your other. You've got two lives, kind of the academic and the working life. And so what I love about the fact is the way that you've always talked about all of this is that you weren't doing it to be a lovely dissertation that goes on the shelf. This is something that hopefully will inspire and enable people to do what they're doing better with data. So I wonder, were there particularly 2 or 3 things that you would consider to be like managerial implications of what you've found in your research?
Yes. No, you raise a good point. This really is to be something that can live and breathe, and I really hope that it can be that. So I'll call out a couple of things. So one of the things that this led to was the development of basically a framework that looks at the benefits that you do get from, really great kind of handling of data, things like having really clear two-way value exchange, having real benefits for consumers, etc. And on the other side, I've actually called out what the main buckets and areas of risk actually are. I had that as a concept going into the research. That was tested through the questions. And then what I really found, which was fantastic, was that this held, but that also people had these really interesting other areas that went in there. So that's something that I will be really happy to share with people. That's something that I feel has really come out quite strongly. So I'm really happy to actually share that with people if they would be interested in that. I think there are other really interesting implications around, actually looking at these risks and actually looking at putting a score on some of them based on the data that you have is something that data leaders can be looking at. It doesn't have to be a massive piece of work. This could be something that you did on a quarterly or even a half-year basis, but looking at, right, these are the major risk areas based on what I see with my data in my business. I think this is even a red, amber, green. This one's a red, this one's an amber, this is moving. Think about the appetite for that risk within your business. What kind of business are you in? Financial services, different risk appetite to marketing. I'm just going to say, put it that way. There are different risk appetites in businesses, and then work on closing that gap. And I would say the final thing would be the real need for cross-functional working around how governance and risk are really implemented in a business. And what I mean by that is, you as a data leader need to be best friends with your legal team, your DPO, your CISO, your CIO. There was quite a lot of mention actually around, there's IT teams, there's data teams, how do they live together? Well, ideally as much as possible, if I'm honest with you, because, you are going to be reliant on them to sort of be able to implement things that you might want to do. And, they are ultimately the holders of some of the data that you're going to need. So I think if you can think about as a data leader, where am I on risk? How could I get a handle on that, just a score on that? And how could I actually look to decrease this over time and move some of these maybe risk areas into towards more of the benefits? I think that's something that could benefit all leaders.
That sounds excellent. So obviously, if you're only going to hand it in the next day or two, but hopefully it will be handed in by the time this is published in a week or so's time. When it's actually published, I assume it will be available if people are interested to read it.
So what I'm going to do, because I do not expect anyone to read the full thesis, particularly literature reviews, which are really only relevant to academia, I'm going to do a short sort of 10-slide summary of what are some of the key findings, some of the things that I would recommend. I'd be very happy to have conversations with people around that and to share some of that. And for everybody who was one of my research participants, I will be offering that pack plus a call or a discussion, whatever they would like within that.
Excellent. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to that. And so if anybody was interested in the future, is LinkedIn the best place to find you?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me, and I'd be very happy to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. It's been lovely to be able to turn the tables and be the one asking you questions this time. But actually, I'm just absolutely fascinated by the research you're doing, and I can't wait to see that pack when it comes out. So thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
What a great conversation to end this season on. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And just remember, Heather's very happy to connect with anybody who is interested in finding out more about her research on LinkedIn. And I really would encourage you to do so. Sadly, that brings us to the end of season 8. And we're going to have a couple of week break because it's hard work putting this together. But rest assured, my team and I have been working really hard planning season 9 already. And some of the interviews for season 9 are already in the can. And I can tell you there's some really interesting things to look forward to in season 9. So I hope you would join me back here soon.